the dog who stood between a child and a killer. In towns like Silver Creek, silence hides more than it reveals. Rusting storefronts, flickering bar signs, cracked sidewalks, ordinary on the surface, but beneath the skin, rot runs deep. On this night, a 7-year-old girl walked through that silence, her fragile frame swallowed by a hoodie, a German shepherd padding beside her like a shadow made of muscle and scars. Lila had no business in the alleys. She was supposed to pick up bread, then hurry home. But hunger forces hard choices, and compassion even harder ones. The sound she heard in the alley wasn't bread or safety. It was suffering, a chorus of groans that pulled her heart forward against her better judgment. The beam of her flashlight revealed what no child should see. Marines, men who had fought for others, broken and left like discarded trash, and towering above them was the man responsible, Victor Kane, smuggler and predator, his boots still wet with blood. His gaze fixed on her, hard and cold. "Leave," he hissed, "or you'll die with them." But Lila didn't stand alone. Aero stepped forward, teeth bared, body coiled like a storm. He wasn't just a dog, he was her shield. Silver Creek had a way of swallowing light. By the time the sun slid behind the low ridges of the desert, the town seemed older than it was. Its cracked sidewalks and boarded windows folding into shadow as if ashamed to be seen. Dust clung to everything. Windows, faded awnings, the rusted hoods of pickup trucks parked crooked along the main street. The neon sign above the Silver Spur diner sputtered on and off in uneven rhythm, painting the empty street with pale pinks that looked more like bruises than light. It was evening, the kind of hour when most families retreated indoors, doors bolted, curtains drawn. Silver Creek wasn't dangerous in the way of big cities, no sirens screaming, no gangs on every corner, but it carried its own brand of menace. Poverty had settled here like an unwanted tenant, and with it came petty crime, whispered deals, and men like Victor Kane who turned small towns into hunting grounds. People walked fast, eyes down, as if they'd learned the desert's lesson. Survive quietly. Don't stand out. Along the cracked pavement of Oak Street, a child's footsteps echoed, small, uneven, but determined. Lila Morgan, 7 years old, moved with the kind of watchfulness rare in children. She was thin as a reed, her hoodie hanging loose on her small frame, sleeves brushing her knuckles. Her hair, the color of old honey left too long in the sun, was tied into a crooked braid her mother had managed that morning before leaving for work. It was already fraying, wisps curling around her sharp, alert eyes. Eyes too old for 7, eyes that seemed to weigh and measure the world. At her side walked Aero, the German shepherd. He wasn't the kind of dog you saw on posters or police calendars. His left ear had a ragged tear, his coat dulled with age and desert grit. But there was strength in the slope of his shoulders, and something almost defiant in the amber of his gaze. His limp was slight now, almost invisible, but Lila still remembered the night she had found him. 3 years ago, behind the diner, ribs showing through his fur, a deep gash along his leg, growling at anyone who dared to come close. Everyone else had passed him by, too busy or too wary. But not Lila. She had sat on the cracked pavement, cross-legged, whispering nonsense words into the dark until his growls softened. Then she stayed, an hour, then 2, until Aero let her touch him. From that night forward, he had not left her side. Some kids had dolls or teddy bears. Lila had Aero. Now, as they moved down the street, the bond between them showed in quiet, ordinary ways. Aero's body shifted each time they approached a pothole, blocking it with his weight, so Lila's small feet wouldn't stumble. She barely noticed anymore. She simply adjusted her stride, brushing her hand along the coarse fur at his neck. Sometimes she leaned close, lips almost at his ear, whispering things she never said to anyone else. Tonight, it was about the stars. "They'll come out soon," she told him softly, glancing at the fading sky. "Do you think they look different from the desert than from the ocean?" Aero's ear flicked, as if answering. Lila smiled faintly, tugging at the frayed cuff of her sleeve. "I think they're the same. But maybe people are different when they look at them." The town around her hummed with its own tired rhythm. A liquor store closed its blinds. A man with a cowboy hat locked up the pawn shop, glancing once at Lila and Aero before turning away quickly. From across the street, laughter spilled out from a dented sedan where a group of teenagers lounged on the hood, passing a cigarette between them. The sound was sharp, careless, edged with the kind of cruelty that found easy targets in kids like Lila. Aero's ears twitched. He slowed, placing himself between the laughter and the girl. His steady presence drew her chin higher. She kept walking, whispering under her breath, "Don't mind them. We've got bread to fetch." A breeze carried the smell of fried oil and old gasoline. Silver Creek wasn't the kind of place that welcomed dreamers. And yet, Lila dreamed, quietly, privately, in the way she pressed her cheek against Aero's neck when no one was looking. Dreams of green fields, of a kitchen table filled with food, of a father she'd never known but sometimes imagined waiting at the end of the street. She never said these things aloud, but Aero knew. He always knew. The streetlights flickered weakly, buzzing in protest against the encroaching dark. Aero slowed again, pausing at the corner where Oak Street bled into the rougher edges of town. His nose lifted, drawing in the dry night air. Lila followed his gaze, her small hand tightening on the leash. Ahead, Silver Alley yawned open, narrow and crooked, its brick walls blackened with years of neglect. Trash cans leaned like drunks against the wall, and broken glass sparkled faintly where neon light caught it. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard something. A low moan, almost too soft to be real. She blinked, tilting her head, straining her ears. Nothing but wind now, whispering through the alley like a warning. She exhaled, relieved. But Aero didn't move. His body stiffened, muscles tense, eyes locked on the alley mouth. He let out a low growl, the kind that came from deep in his chest. Lila froze. She remembered her mother's words before she left the house. Stay on the main road. No alleys. And yet, she crouched slightly, pressing her lips close to Aero's ear again, whispering so low even the wind couldn't steal it. "It's okay. We'll just look. Then we leave." Aero shifted, uneasy, but he didn't pull away. His loyalty wasn't obedience. It was a bond deeper than words. He would follow her, even into the shadows. And in Silver Creek, the shadows always held more than they revealed. The Morgan apartment sat above a laundromat that hummed late into the night, the smell of detergent and steam drifting through the thin floorboards. Inside, the air was warm, but weary, carrying the faint scent of reheated soup and the sharper edge of bleach from Rachel's uniform. The space was small, 2 rooms, a kitchenette, a bathroom, where the faucet dripped when it wanted to. Yet Rachel had fought hard to keep it. Every month it felt like a battle just to pay the rent, to keep the lights on, to give her daughter something that felt like home. At the worn table near the window, a single lamp glowed, throwing a circle of light onto 2 chipped plates. Lila sat quietly in her chair, legs tucked under her, a spoon balanced in her hand as she stirred the thin broth in her bowl. Across from her, Rachel Morgan lowered herself slowly into the opposite chair, shoulders slumping before she caught herself. and straightened again. Her dark hair was pulled tight into a bun, though a few strands had escaped, sticking to the sweat at her temples. Her hands bore the story of her day. Cracked skin from cleaning chemicals, faint burns from hot pans at the diner. The fridge had been nearly empty when she'd opened it an hour earlier. Half a carton of milk gone sour, a jar of mustard, 2 eggs. She had made do with broth and the last scrap of carrot, stretching it thin, but adding enough seasoning that Lila wouldn't wrinkle her nose. That was the secret of survival in Silver Creek, making too little look like enough. Rachel watched her daughter over the rim of her cup. Lila's face was pale in the lamplight, her braid unraveling, shadows beneath her eyes that no child of 7 should carry. And yet there was a sharpness in her gaze, a quiet resilience Rachel both admired and grieved. Childhood wasn't supposed to look like this, measuring every spoonful, noticing the weight of her mother's sighs, whispering secrets to a dog because adults were always too tired. "You're not eating," Lila said softly, without looking up. Rachel forced a small smile. "I had something at the diner." It wasn't a lie exactly. She had stolen a bite of pie crust from a plate before clearing it away, but she knew Lila didn't believe her. The girl's eyes flicked to Rachel's bowl, still full, then back down. She said nothing more, just gave her spoon a slow swirl, as if dragging her hunger through water. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint buzz of the lamp and the distant churn of laundry machines below. Rachel's shoulders sagged again, and she let them. The weight of 2 jobs pressed down heavy tonight. House cleaner by day, waitress by night. Dreams once existed. Nursing school, a future brighter than Silver Creek. But those dreams had been traded away when Lila's father walked out, leaving Rachel with nothing but bills and a 2-year-old. She had never spoken his name since. She didn't need to. The absence spoke for itself. When the bowls were nearly empty, Rachel rose and opened the fridge again, more out of habit than hope. The shelves looked back at her with the same barren truth. She gripped the handle a moment longer, then shut it with a sigh. Her daughter's voice broke the silence. "Miss Hilda said she'd have bread tonight. Maybe some rolls that didn't sell." Rachel turned, her expression taut. Miss Hilda ran the corner store, a kind old woman who always had something tucked away for strays, human or animal. It was true. She'd often saved loaves for Lila and Aero. But the thought of sending her daughter out after dark scraped against Rachel's nerves. "It's late," she murmured, rubbing her temple. "We don't have anything for breakfast," Lila replied quietly, though not accusingly. It was a fact, laid bare between them. Aero, lying near the door with his chin on his paws, lifted his head as if to join the conversation. His amber eyes moved from child to mother, patient but watchful. Rachel pressed her lips together. She thought of the news she'd heard at the diner. A man beaten near the highway, another house broken into at the edge of town. Silver Creek wasn't safe, not for grown men, let alone a child. She looked at Lila again, at the way her daughter's hands curled around the edge of her bowl, knuckles small but white with quiet determination. Hunger was a stubborn thing, and Rachel couldn't feed her child with warnings alone. Her chest ached with the choice. To keep Lila safe inside these walls meant letting her go to bed with nothing but broth in her stomach. To let her go for bread meant trusting the night not to swallow her whole. Neither felt right. She walked back to the table, knelt beside her daughter, and took her hands into her own calloused ones. Lila's eyes lifted, wide and steady, the grey of storm clouds gathering. "I'll let you go," Rachel whispered, her throat tight. "But you listen to me, Lila. You stay on the main road. Do you hear me? No shortcuts. No alleys. Yes, Mama. Rachel squeezed tighter. Say it. No alleys, Lila repeated, voice low but firm. Arrow shifted to his feet, as though already accepting his duty. His tail flicked once against the door. Rachel looked at the dog, then back to her child. And you stay close to him. Always. Lila nodded. Rachel leaned forward, pressing a kiss to her daughter's hair, breathing in the scent of dust and soap, and something faintly sweet she couldn't place. She held her a moment longer, wishing she could hold her forever, wishing she didn't have to let go. Then she straightened, letting the weight of motherhood settle heavy in her chest. Go, she said softly, voice breaking despite herself. Bring back the bread. And as Lila slipped into her jacket, Arrow rising at her side like a shadow come to life, Rachel stood by the door. Her fingers lingered on the lock, even after they were gone. The sound of their footsteps fading into the Silver Creek night. She whispered a prayer she hadn't spoken in years. Keep her safe. The night had a way of pressing down on Silver Creek, as though the desert itself exhaled once the sun went down. Lila stepped out into the street with Arrow close at her side, the air carrying that strange mixture of fried oil from the diner and dust stirred up by the evening wind. Above, the street lamps flickered, their light barely cutting into the shadows pooling between buildings. The leash in her hand was soft with wear, but she didn't need it. Arrow never strayed. His paws padded silently over the pavement, body low and alert, ears flicking at each rustle. He was built for vigilance, for the kind of watching Lila didn't know how to name, but trusted more than anything. Every time his muscles tensed, she felt it through the leash, a warning that the world was not as empty as it looked. She walked faster than usual, pulling her hoodie close, her braid bouncing against her shoulders. Her mother's words pulsed in her head with every step. Stay on the main road. No alleys. It was more than a warning. It was a plea. But the ache in Lila's stomach pushed her forward, and the thought of fresh bread waiting in Miss Hilda's hands made her feet lighter. Still, the night had teeth. At the corner of Oak Street, Arrow paused. His head tilted, nose raised, drawing in the air with a sharp, purposeful sniff. His ears twitched back, then forward again. A sound followed, a faint groan, so soft, so broken it might have been mistaken for wind through rusted shutters. Lila froze. She strained her ears, heart thudding. There it was again, clearer this time, drifting out from a narrow cut in the row of buildings. Silver Alley. Her mother's voice came back, sharp and certain. No alleys. She should keep walking. She should keep her eyes down, pretend she heard nothing. That was what Silver Creek taught people. Survival belonged to those who didn't stop, who didn't look too closely. But Lila wasn't like the others. She had Arrow, and she had a heart that bruised easily when people hurt. The groan came once more, choked and ragged, followed by a muffled thud. Arrow stiffened, a low growl rumbling in his throat, deep enough that Lila felt it vibrate through the leash. His body shifted in front of hers, blocking her from the alley as if to say, not this way, not tonight. She swallowed hard, torn in two. Her stomach knotted with fear, but another voice rose inside her, softer, more insistent. What if it's someone who needs help? What if no one else hears? She crouched slightly, pressing her face close to Arrow's ear. Her whisper came out shaky but firm, as if by speaking it she could make the danger smaller. We just look, she breathed, her fingers gripping the thick fur at his collar. Then we leave. Arrow's growl didn't stop, but his amber eyes shifted toward her. Loyalty won over instinct, as it always did. He didn't move, But he didn't pull her back either. He would follow, even into the shadows. The alley yawned before them, walls leaning inward like tired shoulders, graffiti scrawled in angry lines across brick-stained black with old rain. The single bulb above the pawnshop's back door flickered, spitting light that barely reached the ground. Trash cans lined the narrow space. One tipped, its contents spilling in a sour-smelling heap. Lila took a cautious step forward, flashlight trembling in her hand. The beam cut a thin slice through the dark. An arrow moved with her, pause silent, growl still low but steady. She kept her other hand pressed tight to his collar, anchoring herself. The closer they drew, the stronger the sounds became. Groans, muffled voices, the scrape of boots against stone. It was unmistakable now. Someone was in there. More than one someone. Her heart thudded hard against her ribs, each beat an argument against her courage. Rachel's face flashed in her mind. Tired, worried, the kiss pressed to her hair before she left. She had promised. She had said the words aloud. No alleys. But promises were fragile things when weighed against the sound of suffering. Lila swallowed and leaned her forehead briefly against Aero's neck, finding strength in his warmth. "We look," she whispered again, quieter this time, as if she was trying to convince herself more than him. Aero's ears twitched, his tail stiff. He didn't like it, but he moved with her anyway. Step by step, the alley pulled them deeper, the night holding its breath as though waiting for what they would find. The alley swallowed her flashlight, like it didn't want to give up its secrets. The weak beam shook in Lila's hand, the small circle of light quivering against the brick walls as she edged forward. Aero's low growl vibrated against her palm where it clutched his collar, steady and warning. But she pulled him with her anyway. The sound came again, clearer now, unmistakable. A groan, human, ragged, like breath dragging through broken ribs. Then another, overlapping, softer, but just as pained. Lila's throat tightened. She wanted to run, to obey her mother's words and escape this place. But her feet seemed anchored, pulled forward by something stronger than fear. Her flashlight beam slid across the ground. Discarded beer cans, a broken chain, dark stains she didn't want to name. Then it caught on a shape slumped against the far wall, a boot first, then a leg, then the unmistakable curve of a shoulder in a torn uniform. Lila gasped softly, and the beam jerked higher. There were 3 of them. 3 men sat bound and broken against the cold brick, their hands lashed behind their backs with coarse rope. Their heads drooped forward, chins resting on their chests as if the weight of simply holding upright had become too much. The uniforms they wore, though dirtied and torn, were still recognizable in the flickering light. United States Marines. The first was the largest, broad-shouldered even in defeat, his jaw clenched tight beneath a streak of gray at his temple. A deep cut carved down his cheek, blood dried in a dark line. His camouflage was smeared with dirt, one sleeve torn open to reveal bruises blooming like purple flowers across muscle. His breathing came shallow but steady, each inhale catching faintly as though pain lodged in his chest. A name patch, half obscured, caught the light. Cross. Beside him sat a leaner man, wiry arms corded with muscle, a long scar running the length of his cheekbone. His lips were split, crusted with blood, and one eye swollen shut. His uniform hung ragged, the fabric ripped at the shoulder, soaked dark at the sleeve where blood had long since dried. His head lolled slightly, but even unconscious he looked coiled, like a fighter refusing to surrender. His tag read faintly, Alvarez. The third was the youngest. His face still held the softness of youth beneath the bruises, a trace of boyhood that hadn't yet been carved away by war. His helmet lay cracked at his side, sandy blonde hair matted with sweat and blood. His boots were newer than the others, the soles barely worn. His breaths came fast and shallow, chest hitching with every rise and fall. The patch on his chest read, "Taylor." The sight rooted Lila to the spot. Her flashlight trembled as though her whole body was shivering. And these weren't the kinds of things a child was supposed to see. Marines belonged in movies or parades, not broken and bleeding in the back of Silver Creek's alleys. She was just a girl with a dog. What could she possibly do for them? Her mind screamed to turn back, to run, to go find her mother, to call the police, to do anything but stand here shaking in the dark. And yet, a soft sound broke from the youngest. Taylor. A faint whimper, not unlike the noise Aero had made when she'd first found him hurt years ago behind the diner. A sound that wasn't anger or pride, but pure pain. Something inside her cracked open. She remembered kneeling in the dirt beside Aero then, whispering nonsense just so he wouldn't be alone. She remembered the way his body trembled, the way his amber eyes pleaded for someone to stay. Now, as Taylor's breath rattled, she saw the same plea written in bruises and brokenness. Her heart pounded. Her hands tightened on the flashlight. She felt torn in two. Half of her ready to flee, half of her stepping closer without her permission. Aero pressed against her leg, his body rigid, his growl vibrating like thunder in his chest. He sensed what she didn't yet see, that the night held more than just the wounded. Danger was here, close. But Lila's gaze was fixed on the three men, on the way they clung to life in silence. She whispered, almost to herself, "What do I do?" Her voice barely stirred the air, but Aero's ears flicked. The dog shifted, leaning forward, nose twitching, as if to assure her he was ready for whatever waited. Lila's legs trembled. She wanted to believe her mother's warning had been enough to keep her safe. But standing here now, with three soldiers broken in front of her, she knew safety wasn't the same as right. And sometimes, even children had to choose. Her flashlight wavered, catching the glint of metal on Cross's chest, dulled by grime. The light moved over Alvarez's scar, across Taylor's pale lips as they parted with another groan. She felt the weight of their suffering pressed down on her small shoulders. She took one step closer. Aero followed, his growl deepening. The alley had become a place of stillness and dread, but also something else, something that smelled of choice and consequence. And in that moment, Lila Morgan, just 7 years old, stood balanced between her mother's warning and her own heart, between fear and the unbearable need to help. The groan that had pulled Lila deeper into the alley suddenly twisted into something sharper. A cry choked off by a thud. The sound of flesh meeting boots. Lila's flashlight beam jerked, trembling as it swung across the brick wall. There he was. A man loomed over the broken bodies of the Marines, his figure thick and heavy, like the desert hills themselves. His shoulders were wrapped in a dark jacket, the fabric stretched taut by muscle and layered with dust and grime. Steel-toed boots glinted dully in the weak light, the sole of one lifted and driven mercilessly into Alvarez's ribs. The Marine jerked, a muffled groan ripping through swollen lips, then slumped again. The man's face turned slightly, the beam of light catching on his features. Victor Kane. Even in Silver Creek, a place where everyone pretended not to see, people knew the name. The smuggler who owned the shadows. The man who traded weapons like children, traded marbles. The one who made men disappear without ever raising his voice. Now he was here, in this forgotten alley, his hands stained with soldier's blood. Lila's chest seized. Her throat tightened so sharply she could barely breathe. She hadn't meant to step this far in, hadn't meant to be seen, but the flashlight betrayed her. The weak beam slid across Victor's face, illuminating a jaw like stone, a crooked nose broken long ago and left to heal wrong, and eyes that froze her in place. They weren't wild or raging. They were worse, cold, calculating. A predator's eyes, narrowing in irritation that his hunt had been interrupted by something as small as a child. For a heartbeat, silence stretched. The alley seemed to lean inward, brick and shadow and trash holding its breath. Then Victor spoke. His voice was low, roughened by smoke and years of commanding fear. "Get out of here, kid." He took a step forward, boots crunching on gravel. "Leave, or you'll join them." The words cut through the dark like a blade. Lila's knees trembled, her small hands slick against the flashlight. She wanted to move, to run, but her feet locked in place. Her mother's warning screamed inside her skull. "No alleys, Lila. Stay safe." But her eyes couldn't leave the Marines, broken and bound behind Victor's bulk. They needed her. Victor saw the hesitation. His lips curled, not into a smile, but something colder, a twitch of disdain. He adjusted the jacket on his shoulders, shifting his weight, as if preparing to reach for something. The glint of metal at his hip confirmed it. A knife. Lila gasped, stumbling back a step. That was when Aero moved. The German shepherd launched forward, every muscle in his body snapping into motion. His growl erupted into a bark so fierce it rattled the alley walls, a sound primal enough to make even Victor Kane flinch. Aero planted himself between Lila and the smuggler, body rigid, teeth bared, amber eyes locked on the threat. Victor's gaze flicked down at the dog, narrowing. He let out a short, humorless laugh, though it carried no amusement. "Your mutt's got spirit," he muttered, his voice dripping with mockery. Then his tone sharpened, each word laced with venom. "But spirit gets you killed out here." He raised his hand, as if to strike Aero aside, but the shepherd's bark thundered again, closer, sharper, his body lunging just enough to make Victor halt mid-motion. The dog's teeth snapped inches from Victor's arm, and the smuggler's eyes hardened further. Behind Victor, one of the Marines stirred faintly. Daniel Cross's swollen eyes flickered open for a moment, hazy and dazed. He saw the child's silhouette, the loyal dog braced before her, and for the briefest second, strength flared in his battered features. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse rasp escaped his cracked lips. Lila felt it, though, felt the weight of all their lives pressing against her small shoulders. Her voice cracked as it left her, trembling but defiant. "Leave them alone!" The flashlight beam shook wildly in her hand, then steadied as she thrust it upward into Victor's face. The smuggler cursed, recoiling against the sudden brightness. His free hand came up to shield his eyes, but not before Lila caught the sight of his snarl, teeth clenched in fury at being challenged by a child. For one terrifying moment, Victor lunged forward, the knife flashing faintly in the dim light. Lila's scream ripped through the night, high and piercing, echoing off the alley walls. Aero surged with her, a wall of fur and fury, snapping and barking so loud it sounded like thunder tearing the sky. Somewhere beyond the alley, voices stirred. The teenagers on the sedan, curious, shouting. Windows creaked as lights flicked on. Victor's head jerked toward the noise, calculations sparking behind his cold eyes. He cursed again, then stepped back, his boots grinding against broken glass. For a heartbeat, he glared at Lila, an unspoken promise that this wasn't finished. Then he turned, vanishing into the far shadows of the alley, with a speed that belied his bulk. The darkness swallowed him, leaving only the echoes of his retreat. Lila stood frozen, chest heaving, flashlight shaking in her trembling grip. Aero remained in front of her, body taut, growls rolling low and steady long after the man had gone. His tail did not wag. His eyes stayed fixed on the dark, as though expecting the predator to return any second. Behind them, the Marines groaned again, voices raw with pain. One word rasped out from Alvarez, so soft it almost disappeared in the night. "Help." Lila's breath hitched. Her fear didn't vanish, but something steadier rose in its place. She stepped closer to Aero, pressing her small hand against his neck. "We'll help them," she whispered, more to herself than to him, and in the silence that followed, her words sounded like a vow. For a long, suspended heartbeat, the alley held only the sound of Aero's growls, sharp and guttural, echoing off the brick like thunder rolling through a canyon. Lila's throat tightened until she thought no sound could escape her at all. Then, without warning, her voice broke free. "Help!" It tore through her chest and out into the night, shrill, cracking, but louder than she ever thought herself capable of. The sound startled her, bouncing against the walls, racing toward the mouth of the alley where the night still hummed with distant laughter. Victor Kane's head snapped around. His eyes narrowed into slits of cold fury, the kind that made grown men flinch. For one terrifying second, he looked ready to silence her himself. Knife raised, boots shifting as if to charge. But Aero lunged forward with another volley of barks, savage and relentless, his teeth flashing in the weak glow of the flashlight. The sound wasn't a dog barking anymore. It was a war cry. The laughter outside faltered. From across the street came a startled shout. The teenagers on the rusted sedan sat up, craning their necks toward the alley. One of them muttered, "Did you hear that?" Another answered, voice sharp with unease, "That sounded like a kid." Windows creaked open above. A porch light flicked on. Another voice called into the night, "What's going on out there?" The quiet corner of Silver Creek stirred awake, curiosity mingling with unease. In a town where most people turned away from trouble, sound carried power. Lila's cry had cracked through the silence like glass, and now there was no patching it back together. Victor cursed under his breath, low and vicious. His knife glinted once more, but the noise outside grew louder, footsteps shuffling, voices multiplying. He spat onto the ground, a mixture of rage and calculation flashing in his eyes. He knew what came next. Attention was the one thing a man like him could not afford. With a final glare at Lila, he barked, "This isn't over." His voice like gravel dragged across steel. Then, with surprising speed, he spun and bolted toward the far end of the alley. His boots pounded the pavement, his bulky frame swallowed by shadow, until only the echo of his retreat remained. Aero barked after him, lunging as if he might chase, but Lila's hand clutched tight at his collar. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Stay with me." And just like that, the danger was gone. But the damage remained. Lila's flashlight beam swung wildly as she stumbled forward, knees shaking, toward the three Marines slumped against the wall. Her breath came ragged, every inhale cutting like glass. Aero pressed close, his body taut, nose darting toward each man, as if trying to measure the life left in them. "Sir?" Lila's voice was small again, desperate. She crouched near the largest of the three, Daniel Cross, whose head lolled against the brick. She reached out a trembling hand and touched his shoulder. His body flinched faintly, a groan escaping between cracked lips. Her heart leapt. He was alive. Beside him, Miguel Alvarez stirred, his swollen eye fluttering open for a moment. His gaze, blurry and unfocused, found the child kneeling in front of him. His voice was gravel, barely sound at all, but the words reached her. "Don't leave us." Lila's throat constricted. Her small fingers pressed tighter against Daniel's sleeve, as if she could anchor him here, as if she could keep all three of them tethered to life with the strength of her grip. "I won't," she whispered fiercely, tears pricking her eyes. "I won't leave." Aero whined, leaning down to nuzzle the youngest, Josh Taylor. His rough tongue brushed across the boy's bruised cheek, gentle where men had been cruel. Josh stirred faintly, lips parting with a weak exhale, and Aero barked once, short and sharp, as if commanding him to stay. At the alley's mouth, voices grew louder. The teenagers now edged closer, their bravado thinned by unease. "Hey! Somebody call the cops!" one shouted, his voice cracking. Another muttered, "Holy hell! Are those soldiers?" Porch lights multiplied, spilling pale yellow into the street. Curtains shifted. The quiet street of Silver Creek, so used to silence, was awake and buzzing. And then it came, the distant wail. A siren, faint at first, carried on the dry desert wind, but growing steadily louder. Its rise and fall painted the night in urgency, in the promise of something larger than fear. "Help." Lila gasped, the sound filling her chest. Her small body sagged against Aero, relief crashing into her like a wave. But she didn't let go of the Marines. She stayed crouched, flashlight clutched tight, one hand resting firm on Daniel's sleeve. "Hold on," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please. Just a little longer." The sirens grew nearer, their echoes ricocheting off the narrow alley walls. Red and blue lights began to flicker faintly at the far corner, coloring the bricks with promise. Aero stayed pressed close, his tail stiff, his gaze never leaving the shadows Victor had vanished into. Even in the moment of salvation, he knew the danger wasn't done. But for now, hope was coming. And in the stillness between the wail of sirens, the groans of the wounded, and the pounding of her own heart, Lila realized something that chilled and steadied her all at once. She had screamed into the night, and the world had answered. The wail of sirens grew louder, swallowing the night until it seemed the whole town was vibrating with sound. Their pitch climbed and fell, bouncing off the alley walls, red and blue strobes splashing across brick like bursts of firelight. Lila blinked against the sudden glare, shielding her eyes, her small body still pressed close to the Marines. Aero stood rigid, teeth bared, the hackles along his back raised like a ridge of bristling wire. A police cruiser screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley. Its headlights cut through the gloom, revealing every crack in the pavement, every smear of blood on the Marines' uniforms. Doors slammed. Voices barked orders into radios. A tall officer with a square jaw and clipped blonde hair strode forward, hand on his holster. Another, younger, followed, her auburn curls catching in the spinning light. "Step back," the man called out, his voice steady but urgent. "Everyone back from the victims." Lila flinched, her grip tightening on Daniel's sleeve, as if they might take her away from him. Aero surged forward, barking wildly, teeth snapping in the direction of the strangers. The shepherd's growls echoed like thunderclaps, his body coiled to strike. "Easy," the younger officer said quickly, holding her hands up, palms outward. "Easy, boy. We're here to help." But Aero didn't believe it. His whole body was a wall between the child and the approaching figures, every muscle screaming to protect. His bark ricocheted through the alley, a raw warning no one dared ignore. The older officer reached instinctively for his sidearm, but Lila found her voice, thin and desperate. "No!" she cried, scrambling to her knees and throwing her arms around Aero's neck. "Don't hurt him. He's just scared." The shepherd froze at her touch, though the growl still rumbled deep in his chest. His amber eyes flicked to hers, waiting, listening. "It's okay," she whispered, her lips pressed close to his torn ear. "They're here for us. Stay, Aero. Please." For a moment, the alley held its breath. Then, slowly, the growl faded. Aero's ears twitched, his tail lowered, though his body remained tense. He didn't lie down, didn't relax, but he shifted just enough to let the officers through, on his terms, not theirs. The older officer exhaled, lowering his hand from his holster. He flicked a quick glance to his partner. "Radio for EMTs now." Within seconds, another vehicle slid in behind the cruiser, then an ambulance. 2 paramedics rushed forward, their boots thudding against the pavement, medical bags swinging from their shoulders. One knelt beside Daniel Cross, snapping open a kit, while the other moved to Miguel Alvarez. Scissors glinted as ropes were cut away, the sound of snapping fibers sharp in the night. "Multiple fractures," the lead medic muttered, pressing along Daniel's ribs with quick precision. "Pulse weak but steady." "Concussion here," the second called, shining a penlight into Alvarez's swollen eye. "Possible internal bleeding." At the far end, Josh Taylor stirred faintly as Aero nudged his cheek again, whining softly. The medic knelt quickly, fingers against the boy's neck. Rapid, shallow breathing. "Get him on oxygen as soon as we can." Lila hovered, trembling, clutching the flashlight as though it were the only thing keeping her tethered. She wanted to help, to do more than just sit useless, but the sight of the paramedics working so fast, so surely, overwhelmed her. Her small body shook as she whispered again and again, "They're gonna be okay. They have to be okay." Daniel Cross's eyelids fluttered. His lips parted in a faint groan, breath rattling against cracked lips. One eye opened a sliver, cloudy and dazed. He looked around, unfocused, until his gaze caught on Lila. For a moment, his expression shifted. Not soldier, not victim, but something softer. "Little one." His voice rasped, barely audible, but filled with something she recognized. Gratitude. Lila leaned closer, tears blurring her vision. "Don't talk. Just stay. Help's here." Daniel's fingers twitched faintly against the concrete, as if reaching for her. She slid her small hand into his, squeezing tight. He exhaled, slow and shallow, but his jaw unclenched as though the pain eased. The paramedic glanced up, eyes catching on the strange tableau, child and soldier, hand in hand. For a moment, even the medic paused, then nodded once. "He'll hold on," he said firmly, as if promising it to her. Aero shifted to her other side, his head pressed against her shoulder, his warm breath grounding her in the chaos. His eyes never left the stranger's, but his body leaned just enough into her to steady her trembling frame. The alley that had moments before been a cage of fear now hummed with urgency. Radios crackled with clipped words. "3 confirmed. Need transport immediately. Possible concussion. Blood loss." The officers moved quickly, securing the scene, eyes scanning the shadows where Victor Kane had vanished. But for Lila, the world had narrowed to the 3 battered men. The dog pressed against her, and the warmth of Daniel's rough hand squeezing hers once before his strength gave way again. She swallowed hard, pressing her forehead to Aero's neck, whispering, We found them. We really found them. And in that moment, despite the flashing lights and chaos, the child who should have been too small, too fragile, became something else entirely. A quiet anchor in the storm. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, a relentless white that washed the waiting room in sterility. The air smelled of antiseptic and old coffee, the kind that had sat on hot plates too long. Plastic chairs lined the walls, their hard edges unforgiving, their cracked seats covered with the weary bodies of people waiting for news they couldn't control. Lila sat in one of them, her knees pulled up beneath her hoodie, arms wrapped tight around herself. Aero lay sprawled at her feet, chin resting on his paws, his amber eyes flicking toward every sound, the squeak of sneakers against linoleum, the rolling of a gurney, the faint beep of monitors from down the hall. He hadn't left her side since the alley, his body an anchor when the rest of the world had become too big, too bright, too loud. Across the room, the glass doors slid open with a hiss. Rachel Morgan burst in, still wearing her diner uniform, apron strings dangling loose, a stain of grease dark across her sleeve. Her breath came in shallow bursts as she scanned the room, her face taut with panic. The moment her eyes landed on Lila, she didn't walk. She ran. "Lila!" Her voice cracked in the sterile air, half a sob, half a scolding shout. Lila stood too quickly, nearly tripping on the chair leg. And then her mother's arms were around her, pulling her so close she could barely breathe. Rachel clutched her, as if trying to fuse their bodies together, one hand cradling the back of her daughter's head, the other pressing against her thin shoulders. "You could have been killed," Rachel whispered fiercely, her words muffled against Lila's hair. "What were you thinking?" "I told you, no alleys, no alleys, Lila." Tears pricked Lila's eyes, hot and shameful, but she clung back just as tightly. I heard them, Mama. They were hurt. I couldn't just—" Her voice faltered, the memory of broken bodies pressing too close. They would have died. Rachel pulled back just enough to see her face. Her own eyes brimmed with tears, cheeks flushed with fear and exhaustion. "You are 7 years old," she said, voice trembling with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. 7. You're supposed to be safe, not— Her throat closed, cutting off the rest. She pulled Lila in again, holding on like if she let go, the world might steal her child away. For a moment, nothing existed but the sound of Rachel's sobs, muffled against Lila's hair, and the steady hum of machines down the hall. Aero lifted his head, whining softly, pressing his muzzle against Rachel's leg, as if to remind her. I was there. She wasn't alone. Rachel let out a shaky breath, loosening her grip just enough to cup her daughter's face in both hands. Her thumb brushed away the tears streaking Lila's cheek. "Don't you ever do that to me again," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Don't you ever make me wonder if I'll never see you again." "I'm sorry," Lila whispered, "but I had to." Rachel closed her eyes, resting her forehead against her daughter's, a fragile truce forming in that small space between breath and skin. Love, anger, relief, terror, all of it tangled together until words became useless. The squeak of rubber soles against linoleum broke the moment. Both mother and child turned as a woman in pastel scrubs stepped into the waiting room. She was small and kind-eyed, her brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail, square glasses slipping down her nose. Her name tag read Nurse Sloane. "Miss Morgan?" she asked gently. Rachel straightened, her hands still gripping Lila's shoulders. "Yes." "That's me." The nurse offered a soft smile. "The Marines your daughter found. They're stable. It was close, But our team got to them in time. They're going to make it. Rachel let out a sharp, audible exhale, her knees buckling slightly as relief rushed through her. She glanced at Lila, who looked both stunned and relieved, her small chest rising and falling too fast. Aero thumped his tail once against the tile floor. "Thank God," Rachel murmured, pressing a trembling hand to her lips. Nurse Sloane hesitated for a moment, then added with a tilt of her head, "One of them, Sergeant Daniel Cross, has regained consciousness, and he's asked to see." She glanced down at Lila, a gentle warmth in her eyes. "The little girl and her dog." Lila blinked, stunned. "He asked for me?" The nurse's smile deepened. "Yes. He said you were the reason he's still breathing, him and his brothers. He wants to thank you properly." Rachel's hand tightened protectively on Lila's shoulder, instinct flaring. "She's just a child," she said quickly. "She doesn't need to." But Lila's eyes lifted to hers, wide and pleading. "Mama, please, I have to." For a moment, Rachel's jaw clenched, torn between shielding her daughter from more pain and honoring the bravery that had already carried her further than any child should go. Finally, she exhaled, brushing a stray lock of hair from Lila's forehead. "I'll be right there," she whispered. "Every second." Aero rose to his feet, tail swishing once, as if he understood the weight of what was coming. Nurse Sloane nodded gently, gesturing toward the hall. "Come on then, he's waiting." And as Lila followed, her small hand still wrapped tight in her mother's, Aero padding loyally beside her, the harsh buzz of fluorescent lights no longer felt so cold. For the first time that night, there was something else in the air. Not just fear, not just exhaustion, hope. The hospital corridor stretched long and sterile, its pale blue walls broken only by the occasional framed landscape print that seemed too cheerful for a place filled with so much pain. The rhythmic beeping of monitors bled from open doorways, mingling with the faint scent of antiseptic. Lila's sneakers squeaked softly on the linoleum as she followed Nurse Sloane. Rachel walked close behind, one hand on her daughter's shoulder as if steadying her for every step. Aero padded silently, his claws ticking faintly against the floor. When they reached the room, the nurse slowed, her voice gentle. "He's awake, but very weak, only for a few minutes." She gave Rachel a knowing look, then crouched slightly to Lila's level. "You don't have to be afraid. Sometimes when people are hurting, the smallest kindness means the most." Lila nodded, though her stomach tightened. She gripped Aero's collar with both hands, as if the warmth of his fur could anchor her against the swirl of nerves inside. The door creaked open. Sergeant Daniel Cross lay propped against thin hospital pillows, an IV trailing into his arm. His face was swollen, one eye bruised to a deep purple, a strip of gauze taped across his temple. His chest rose and fell in uneven rhythm, each breath a visible effort. But when his gaze lifted and landed on Lila, something in his expression softened. "You came," he rasped, his voice low and hoarse, as though each word had to crawl through gravel. For a moment, Lila couldn't move. She felt the weight of the machines, the wires, the bruises that made this man look less like a soldier and more like the broken figure she'd seen in the alley. She wanted to run, but Aero nudged her leg, guiding her forward. Slowly, she stepped closer until she stood beside the bed. Daniel's hand lifted weakly, trembling with the effort. Lila hesitated, then slipped her small hand into his. His grip was rough, calloused, but faint, yet he held on as though her touch tethered him to the present. "You saved us," he whispered, his gaze locked on hers. Lila shook her head quickly, her braid swinging loose. "No, I'm just a kid. It was Aero." Her voice cracked on the name, and she bent down to press her cheek against the shepherd's head. "He's the brave one." Daniel's lips twitched into the faintest shadow of a smile. His gaze shifted to Aero, who had stepped closer to the bed. With surprising gentleness for such a large dog, Aero placed his front paws against the mattress, bracing his weight carefully before leaning in. His tongue flicked once, then again, swiping across Daniel's cheek with a wet, unapologetic kiss. The Marine let out a broken laugh that turned quickly into a wince of pain. "Ow!" He groaned softly, then whispered, "Worth it." Rachel, standing near the doorway, pressed a trembling hand to her lips. Her eyes glistened, watching the fragile exchange between her daughter, this battered soldier, and the dog who had somehow bridged the space between despair and survival. Daniel's voice grew softer, but there was steel hidden beneath the weakness. "Don't let anyone tell you different, little one. You heard us when no one else did. You came when others turned away." His hand squeezed faintly around hers. "That's what saving looks like." Lila's throat tightened, her eyes stinging. She shook her head, whispering, "I was so scared." "Good," Daniel said, his words broken but deliberate. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving anyway. You've got more of it than most grown men I've known." Silence settled, heavy but warm. Aero eased down from the bed, curling against Lila's legs, his body pressed close as though keeping watch even here. The monitor beside Daniel beeped steadily, a quiet reminder that life was still in him. Rachel stepped forward now, her hand brushing Lila's shoulder. She spoke softly, her voice almost reverent. She shouldn't have had to be brave tonight, but thank God she was. Daniel's gaze shifted to Rachel, and though he looked too weak for more words, gratitude shone clearly in his battered features. The nurse cleared her throat gently from the doorway. "That's enough for now. He needs rest." Lila nodded, but she didn't pull her hand away immediately. She looked once more into Daniel's tired eyes, and in that gaze she saw something she couldn't name. Trust, respect, maybe even a silent promise. "Rest now," she whispered, her small voice trembling. "We'll stay close." Finally, she let go, stepping back as Aero pressed against her side. Daniel's eyes closed, his hand still faintly curled as though holding onto the ghost of hers. As Rachel led her daughter back into the corridor, Lila turned once more to look through the half-open door. And for the first time since the alley, the knot in her chest loosened. She had been just a child, with only a flashlight and a dog, but tonight that was enough. Morning crept into St. Elmo's Regional in thin gold ribbons, slipping through the blinds and striping the waiting room with light. The fluorescent buzz still owned the air, but sunlight softened the edges, made the plastic chairs look less like hard shells and more like places where tired people could rest their bones. Lila sat curled in one, legs tucked beneath her, the sleeves of her hoodie swallowing her hands. Aero lay at her feet, chin on his paws, eyes open and watchful in that way of his, as if he had decided sleep was a luxury for safer worlds. Rachel stood by the window with a paper cup of coffee she hadn't tasted, staring at nothing. The night had drained her, then filled her back up with the kind of relief that leaves a person shaky. Every few breaths, she glanced down at Lila, and then at the door to the corridor, as if bracing for more news, good or bad, because life in Silver Creek had trained her to expect both. Nurse Sloane approached with the quiet pace of someone who lives in the margins of other people's storms. "How are we doing?" she asked softly. Rachel lifted the cup in a small, apologetic gesture, trying not to spill. The nurse's smile reached her eyes. She crouched near Lila and stroked Arrow's head with two careful fingers. "Your Marines are stubborn," she said, almost fond. "Stubbornness is a kind of medicine I've found." Lila leaned forward. "They're okay." "Stable," Sloane replied. "Better than last night by a mile. Sergeant Cross has been awake in and out. Kept asking if the girl and her dog were still around." She paused, as if weighing a thought, then added, "He wasn't the only one." Rachel straightened. "What do you mean?" Sloane rose, smoothing her scrubs. "We have a visitor from Camp Clearwater. Liaison detail. Says he won't take much of your time." Rachel looked toward the doors, just as they slid open, with a hushed sigh. A woman in a pressed uniform stepped through, tall, sun-browned, a neat braid down her back. Her name strip read Nguyen. Beside her, a stocky corporal carried a small envelope and a cardboard box that smelled faintly of something warm and yeasty. "Ms. Morgan?" the officer said, stopping a respectful distance away. "Captain Riley Nguyen, Base Liaison, Camp Clearwater." She tipped her chin toward Lila. "And you must be the reason 3 of my Marines are still breathing." Lila's cheeks colored. She glanced at Arrow, who thumped his tail once without lifting his head, as if to say, "Share the credit, kid." Riley's expression softened. "We don't usually do this in hospital waiting rooms," she said, "but I had a feeling the usual rules could stretch for one morning." She nodded to the corporal, who opened the box. Inside, still warm beneath a folded towel, were 4 big cinnamon rolls, butter pooling in their swirls. "For you both," Riley said, "with thanks from the mess." Rachel blinked, caught between gratitude and suspicion, the survival reflex of a woman who'd learned that gifts sometimes carried strings. "Captain, that's kind, but—" "No strings," Riley said simply. "Just sugar." Nurse Sloane laughed under her breath and went to fetch plates. Lila broke a corner off one roll and held it beneath the chair for Arrow. He sniffed, accepted it with royal seriousness, then licked a smear of icing from her finger. When the small ceremony of sweetness had settled, Riley drew the envelope from her breast pocket. "I'm here because Sergeant Cross asked for something that isn't entirely regulation," she said, eyes flicking to Lila's face. "He'd like to thank you properly, on base, where his team can keep an eye on him, while he pretends he's not supposed to be resting." A flicker of humor softened the line of her mouth. "He asked if we might invite you, both of you and your mother, to lunch at Camp Clearwater." The words seemed to pull the room into a quieter register. Rachel's fingers tightened around her cup. "On base?" "Yes, ma'am," Riley said. "Courtyard garden. Nothing fancy. Some of our people want to put faces to the miracle." She nodded toward Arrow. "And pause." Rachel didn't answer immediately. She looked at her daughter, the smallness of her in that chair, the way she leaned into the dog without thinking, like a plant turning toward light. Then she looked at the captain, at the precise seams of her uniform, the steadiness in her eyes. "I appreciate the invitation," Rachel said slowly. "But last night, there was a man. He saw my daughter. He won't like that anyone's talking about this." Her voice trembled just enough to betray the dread behind the words. "I need her safe. I need quiet." Riley listened without interrupting, hands clasped behind her back. When she answered, her tone softened to something that lived beneath command, a personal register. "I hear you," she said. "Security will issue visitor passes. We'll meet you at the gate and escort you in and out. No press, no fuss. If anything feels wrong, you blink twice, and I'll cancel the whole thing." She held Rachel's gaze an extra beat. Camp Clearwater is the safest place I know how to make it. The corporal, who had been silent, cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said to Rachel with surprising gentleness. "I was on the convoy that night. We get trained to run toward trouble, but most folks don't. Your little girl did. Sometimes letting people say thank you is part of the healing." Lila slid her palm along Arrow's back, tracing the ridge of his spine with a fingertip. "We don't have to if you don't want to," she said, barely above a whisper. But her eyes had changed, the shy spark of a child who has been seen and is not sure she deserves it. Rachel felt something hitch inside her. She had built their lives on 3 truths. Work hard, trust little, keep your child close. The alley had broken one of those truths, and then, somehow, returned her daughter to her arms. Gratitude, the giving of it, the receiving, felt dangerous and necessary in equal measure. She looked at Arrow. The shepherd had shifted to sitting, alert but calm, as if he'd made his own calculation and found no threat here. His ear twitched. His tail tapped once against the tile. Rachel exhaled slowly. "All right," she said, and the word seemed to swallow a small stone on its way out. "We'll come, but it's quick." And quiet. Riley's shoulders relaxed a fraction. "Quick and quiet," she agreed. "Tomorrow at noon." From the envelope, she produced 3 laminated passes attached to plain lanyards. The names had already been printed. Rachel Morgan, Lila Morgan, and in a neat, amused hand, Arrow, canine guest. Lila's mouth tilted into a smile she tried to hide. "They spelled his name right," she whispered into Arrow's ruff. He answered with a warm huff that fogged her wrist. Nurse Sloane returned with a plastic bag. "For later," she said to Rachel, tucking an extra cinnamon roll inside with a wink. "Heroes get hungry." Rachel shook her head, half protest, half surrender. "We're not." "Let it be true for a morning," the nurse said gently. "You can return it to the world tomorrow, if you have to." Riley offered her hand. Rachel hesitated, then took it. The captain's grip was firm, steady. The kind of handshake that says, "I will do what I said I would do." "We'll meet you at Gate 3, Riley said. "Noon. If anything changes, you'll hear it from me first." She tipped 2 fingers toward Lila and Arrow. "Bring your appetites." When they left, the room felt larger by some measure. That had nothing to do with square footage. Rachel sat beside her daughter, and for the first time in what felt like days, allowed herself to lean back in the chair. They ate the rest of the cinnamon rolls in companionable silence, icing clinging to Lila's lip, until Arrow stole it with a precise, parental lick. After a while, Rachel turned the lanyard over in her hands, reading her name again as though to test its weight. "Quick and quiet," she murmured, as if rehearsal could make it real. Then she looked at her daughter's face, the open, hopeful way it met the world, even after last night. "All right, kiddo," she said, tapping the pass gently against Lila's knee. "Tomorrow we say thank you." Arrow rose, stretched, and touched his nose to both of their wrists in turn, sealing something that didn't need words. Outside, the light climbed a little higher, and for the first time since the alley, the day felt like it might carry more than fear. It might carry the beginning of something else, small, quiet, and sturdy as a child's hand in a soldier's grip. The gates of Camp Clearwater swung open with a mechanical groan, metal against metal, as the noon sun poured down over the desert base. Rows of barracks stood crisp and orderly against the backdrop of red rock ridges, their beige paint blending with the earth as if to disguise the steel hearts beating inside. Soldiers moved with purpose across the courtyards, uniforms pressed. boots striking in a rhythm that spoke of discipline and repetition. For Rachel Morgan, it was a world she had only seen from the highway, a world she had always told herself belonged to someone else, not to women raising daughters in the shadow of poverty. For Lila, it felt like stepping into another country entirely. She clutched Aero's leash tightly, her eyes wide as she followed Captain Riley Nguyen past the security checkpoint and into the courtyard, where tables had been set. The air smelled faintly of grilled meat and desert sage. Laughter floated above the steady hum of duty. Soldiers gathering in small clusters, voices low but warm. It wasn't loud, like the town fairs Lila had been to, or rowdy like the diners where her mother sometimes worked the late shift. It was steadier, anchored. At the center of the courtyard stood a picnic table draped with a simple checkered cloth. Paper plates, sweating bottles of iced tea, and a platter of grilled chicken sat waiting. Someone had set a vase of wildflowers in the middle, a touch of softness against the hard lines of military life. "Here we are," Captain Nguyen said, her voice warm as she gestured toward the table. "Lunch with friends." Rachel's hand hovered just above her daughter's shoulder, guiding her forward, but Lila slowed, her sneakers scuffing against the concrete. The weight of all the eyes turned toward her made her stomach flutter. Men and women in uniform, some with fresh bandages or slings across their arms, smiled at her in quiet recognition. Their gazes carried gratitude too heavy for a 7-year-old to understand fully. But Lila felt it just the same. Aero broke the moment with a sharp huff, as if impatient with her hesitation. He trotted forward, his sable coat gleaming in the sunlight, tail swishing once. A ripple of amusement spread among the soldiers. "There's the real hero," someone called out. Laughter followed, light but genuine. The tension in Lila's chest loosened slightly. She trailed after Aero, the leash slack in her hand now, watching as he stopped in front of a tall Marine with a bandaged arm. Aero sniffed once, then leaned his head into the man's chest. The Marine chuckled and scratched behind his ear. "Good soldier," he murmured. More Marines crouched down, calling softly, extending careful hands. Aero moved among them with surprising gentleness, nudging knees, accepting pats, tolerating a playful tug at his bandana. For a dog once abandoned behind a diner, who had growled at every stranger, he seemed almost regal now, like he understood that this was his court and these were his people. Lila watched, her lips tugging into a small, shy smile. It felt strange, seeing Aero belong so easily in a place she didn't. But when she caught the way the soldiers' eyes softened, how their voices grew lighter as they touched him, she realized something she hadn't before. Maybe Aero wasn't just hers anymore. Or maybe he was theirs too. "Lila?" She turned. Sergeant Daniel Cross stood nearby, leaning against the arm of a fellow Marine for support. His face was still swollen, stitches along his hairline, but his posture held the weight of command. His voice, though hoarse, carried warmth. "Glad you came." She nodded, suddenly shy again, clutching the hem of her shirt. "Mama said we could." Daniel's smile deepened. "Your mama made the right call." He gestured to the table. "Come on, before the food gets cold." The lunch was simple. Grilled chicken, coleslaw, soft rolls, and pie that crumbled at the touch of a fork. But to Lila, it felt like a feast. She sat between Rachel and Daniel, Aero stretched at her feet beneath the bench, head tilted hopefully toward any hand that might slip him a piece of bread. The soldiers told stories between bites, childhoods in far-off states, jokes traded during long deployments. The nicknames that stuck, whether they liked them or not. Lila listened, wide-eyed, soaking in every word. She told them about Biscuit, the three-legged cat she'd rescued once, and about how Aero sometimes snored so loud she thought the roof might rattle. The Marines laughed softly, not out of mockery, but with the kind of reverence that made her cheeks flush warm. Halfway through the meal, Daniel tapped his fork against his cup, drawing the courtyard into a hush. His voice wavered slightly, but steadied as he spoke. "Marines are trained to fight for each other," he began, "to run toward danger, no matter the cost. But that night, we were down, beaten, broken, and it wasn't another Marine who came." He paused, his eyes falling on Lila. It was a little girl and her dog, a girl who didn't run away when she could have. Lila's breath caught. She wanted to hide, but Aero's head nudged against her knee, steadying her. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. The air shifted. Curiosity, respect, anticipation. And he opened it, revealing a silver medallion etched with the eagle, globe, and anchor of the Marine Corps. Beneath it, a brass plate gleamed with a single word: Aero. He stood, his movement slow but deliberate, and stepped toward the dog. "Every Marine earns his uniform," Daniel said softly, "and sometimes so does a shepherd." Bending down, he clipped the medal onto Aero's collar, right beside the red bandana he still wore. The dog stood perfectly still, tail lifting, ears pricked, as if sensing the weight of the moment. A murmur of approval swept the courtyard, followed by applause. It wasn't loud or ceremonial. It was warmer, more personal, a circle of soldiers honoring one of their own. Lila wiped at her eyes with the sleeve of her hoodie. Aero looked up at her, the medal gleaming against his fur, and for a moment she could have sworn his eyes held a quiet pride. Rachel leaned close, whispering, "Looks like someone just got promoted." Lila laughed, the sound trembling but true, and wrapped her arms around Aero's neck. "Good boy," she whispered into his fur. "You did it." And under the noonday sun, surrounded by strangers who no longer felt like strangers, Lila felt the smallest, fiercest spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. The courtyard hummed with easy laughter, the kind that rises only after fear has broken and relief settles in its place. Plates were stacked with grilled chicken and coleslaw, crumbs of apple pie scattered across paper napkins. The Marines leaned back in their chairs, boots stretched out beneath the picnic table, their voices weaving together stories that moved between war and childhood like threads of two very different fabrics. Miguel Alvarez told a story about chasing his sister's cat onto a Detroit rooftop when he was 12, only to freeze halfway up the ladder because of his fear of heights. Josh Taylor, his voice still shaky from the concussion, admitted he'd once entered a spelling bee dressed as a pirate because his teacher dared him. The courtyard erupted in laughter, deep and healing, the kind that scraped away some of the weight pressing on their ribs. Lila sat quietly at first, her small hands folded in her lap, Aero stretched beside her bench like a shadow with fur. She listened, wide-eyed, as though these stories were treasure maps leading into worlds she could never imagine. But gradually, with gentle nudges from Daniel Cross, she found her own voice joining theirs. "My dream," she said shyly, her fingers twisting the corner of her napkin, "is to be a veterinarian one day, for dogs like Aero. For all animals that don't have someone." The Marines fell silent for a moment, not with indifference, but with a gravity that came when grown men realized a child still dared to dream in a world that had shown her its darkness. Daniel's bruised mouth tilted into the ghost of a smile. "Sounds like the best job there is," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "You've already got the heart for it." Aero gave a soft huff, as if in agreement, and laid his head across Lila's shoes. She scratched his torn ear absent-mindedly, her eyes bright now, almost glowing. For the first time since the alley, she sounded like a child untouched by fear, her words colored by hope instead of trembling. Rachel watched her daughter's face from across the table. The tight knot in her chest loosened at the sound of that small, earnest voice. For just a heartbeat, she let herself believe this lunch, this laughter, this sunlight, maybe it was the beginning of something better. But shadows have a way of creeping into the brightest hours. The courtyard gate clanged open. A tall figure in crisp uniform strode across the gravel, his boots striking sharp and fast. Lieutenant Armin Delgado, liaison officer at the base, carried a manila folder clutched in one hand. His expression was carved from stone. Every line of his jaw set tight, his gaze searching until it landed on Rachel. The laughter dimmed. Conversations faltered into silence. "Sergeant Cross," Delgado said, his tone clipped. Then, with a glance at Rachel, "Ms. Morgan." Rachel's spine straightened instinctively. "Yes?" Delgado drew the folder from beneath his arm and laid a photograph flat on the table. His voice carried a gravity that left no space for misunderstanding. "This was left at your apartment last night." Rachel stared. Her breath caught. The photo showed her own front door, lock intact, but taped across it in thick, black scrawl was a single note. "Keep quiet or else." Her coffee cup trembled in her grip, liquid sloshing over the rim. Lila froze, her small chest tightening, eyes darting between her mother and the soldier. "Mama?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Arrow's head lifted sharply, ears pricking, a low growl starting deep in his chest, as though he too recognized threat in ink. Delgado continued, his voice steady but grim. "No valuables were taken. Nothing touched. Whoever entered wasn't there to steal. They wanted you to know they could get in." The weight of his words pressed into the courtyard like a sudden storm cloud. The warmth of laughter evaporated, replaced by a chill that seeped into the marrow of every person present. Rachel pressed a trembling hand against her daughter's back, pulling her closer. "They're targeting us," she whispered, her throat tight. Delgado's jaw clenched. "We believe Victor Kane's network left this message. He knows your daughter saw him. He knows she could identify him." His eyes softened for only a second as they flicked to Lila, then hardened again. "This is not over." The Marines exchanged tense glances. Miguel Alvarez's hands balled into fists on the table. Josh Taylor swallowed hard, his boyish face paling further. Even Daniel Cross, bruised and stitched, leaned forward, his jaw taut with fury that his body was too broken to unleash. Lila shrank against her mother's side, confusion and fear spilling across her features. "But we didn't do anything wrong," she whispered, her voice trembling. Rachel's arms tightened around her daughter. "I know, baby, I know." But her eyes, sharp and dark, met Delgado's. "What happens now?" Delgado placed the folder against his chest. "We move you to base housing immediately. You'll be safer here, under military protection. No arguments." The silence that followed was thick, fragile. The wildflowers on the table swayed in a sudden breeze, their petals trembling as though even nature recoiled from the threat. Rachel nodded slowly, though her eyes still burned with fear. Lila pressed her face into Arrow's fur, breathing in his scent, grounding herself in the steady thump of his tail against the gravel. For a moment, it was only them, the child, the dog, and the shadow of danger that had followed them even into the heart of safety. The lunch that had been filled with sunlight and laughter ended with a hush, each soldier keenly aware that their world had just shifted again. Gratitude had given way to vigilance. Joy had been cut by the blade of warning, and for the first time, Lila understood. This wasn't just about saving 3 Marines in an alley anymore. It was about survival. The northern end of Camp Clearwater looked less like a military base and more like a modest apartment complex. Rows of stucco buildings stood in rigid lines, all the same desert beige, their windows shaded against the New Mexico sun. Soldiers patrolled with rifles slung at their shoulders, eyes sweeping the fences for shadows. Inside, the quarters were plain. A sagging couch, 2 small bedrooms, a linoleum-floored kitchenette, a single clock, ticking too loudly on bare walls. Comfort on the surface, but to Rachel, it felt like a waiting room, borrowed, fragile. Lila ran from room to room, braid bouncing, sneakers squeaking. "Mama, look, a bookshelf and a quilt on the bed," she exclaimed, thrilled by the novelty. Rachel smiled faintly, but saw only thin locks on doors, sight lines from each window, the fence pressing against cactus. Where her daughter saw coziness, she saw the edges of protection. Arrow padded through the rooms, nails clicking, ears swiveling at every sound. He sniffed each corner, caught the creak of boots in the hall, the call of coyotes beyond the wire. When he returned to Lila, his stance was rigid, safe for now, but not safe enough. That night, Lila whispered goodnight into his fur, her hand tangled in his collar as she drifted off. Arrow circled, then settled beside the bed, eyes flicking open at every gust or creak. Rachel lingered in the doorway, arms folded, watching her daughter's fragile sleep. For 7 years, she had raised her alone. Midnight shifts, empty cupboards, lessons in caution. And still, Lila had stepped into an alley no one else dared, and drawn the gaze of men who thrived on cruelty. Anger should have come, but instead, Rachel felt a twisted pride. Her child's bravery had saved lives and painted a target on their backs. Kneeling at the bed, she brushed hair from Lila's forehead. Arrow lifted his head, amber eyes steady. "Keep her safe," Rachel whispered. He blinked once, slow and deliberate, as if in promise. The clock ticked on as she whispered her own vow into the dark. "You'll have to go through me first." Arrow's tail thumped once in answer. By morning, Rachel sat at the kitchen table, clutching cold coffee like an anchor. Arrow paced, ears sharp. The knock came. 3 raps, firm. He growled low. "It's Lieutenant Delgado," called a voice. Rachel opened the door with a steadying breath. Delgado entered, tall and lean, presence filling the room before his words did. His eyes carried the weight of long service. He set a folder on the table. "It's time you understand what you're caught up in. No sugarcoating." Inside were grainy photographs, warehouses, crates with false labels, satellite shots of trucks weaving across borders. Delgado tapped one image. Victor Kane, smuggler, trafficker, black market broker. He's been on our radar for years. Guns, drugs, intel, slippery, ruthless. We've never caught him mid-act. Until now. Rachel's breath caught. "And my daughter?" Delgado's gaze hardened. She saw him, recognized him, interrupted him. That makes her a liability. And in Kane's world, liabilities don't live long. Rachel's fists clenched. She's 7 years old. He doesn't care. He sees threats, not children. Arrow growled again, body angled toward the door. Rachel's voice trembled. "So she's marked now. Because she tried to help, we'll never be safe again." Delgado leaned forward. "Listen. What she did was extraordinary. She saved 3 Marines who'd be dead without her. But Kane knows her face now. He will want to erase it." Rachel's voice cracked. "And you? Do you want to use her as bait?" Delgado shook his head firmly. "No. My job is to keep her alive. But it will mean sacrifices, privacy, freedom, normal life. Your world has changed forever." He slid a map of the base across the table. A red circle marked their housing. Cameras on every entrance. Double patrols. Plainclothes officers outside. Kane has reach, but not here, unless someone lets him in. Rachel stared at the neat lines and red ink, promises on paper. Ink couldn't stop Kane. Ink couldn't erase the note taped to her apartment door. "So we hide," she whispered. "For now," Delgado said. "We're dismantling his network, but it won't end overnight. You need to be ready for a long fight." Rachel looked toward Lila's door, where faint light spilled across the carpet. She deserves a childhood, not a battlefield. "Then let us hold the battlefield," Delgado said. "You hold on to her childhood." Her eyes burned. She stroked Arrow's back, grounding herself in his steady warmth. "Then we'll fight." That night, sleep came to Lila reluctantly. She curled beneath the lavender-scented quilt, Arrow pressed against her bed frame. At first, the hum of the air conditioner and her mother's shifting in the next room wove together into something almost safe. But dreams are indifferent to walls. She was back in the alley, flashlight beam rolling across bloodied faces, boots slamming into a Marine's ribs. "Leave," the man snarled, "or you'll join them." Lila bolted upright, gasping, eyes wild. For a split second, she expected him at her bed. Instead, it was Arrow, already on his feet, paws on the mattress, head pressed firmly into her lap. His weight grounded her, his breath steady. "I saw him," she whispered through tears. "I saw him." The shepherd stayed unmoving, tail thumping once, as if to say, "I am here. You are safe." Rachel appeared in the doorway, alarmed. "Lila?" But Lila could only sob into Arrow's fur. Rachel knelt, smoothing damp hair. "She's dreaming it again," she whispered, though the dog already seemed to know. Rachel kissed her daughter's temple. "You're safe, baby. You hear me? Safe." Slowly, Lila's breathing matched Arrow's rhythm. Her grip loosened into gentle strokes along his ear. "I don't want to dream anymore," she whispered. Rachel's heart broke. Before she could answer, Arrow climbed onto the bed, curling protectively around her small body. She wrapped her arms around his neck, cheek pressed to his fur. And for the first time since the alley, her eyes closed willingly. Rachel sat by the window, hands trembling, watching as Lila's sobs quieted into soft hiccups. Arrow's eyes stayed half open, ears twitching at each sound. But his presence shifted the room. It no longer felt haunted. It felt guarded. "You're more than a dog, aren't you?" Rachel murmured. "You're her shield." Arrow blinked once, lowering his head to Lila's pillow. His chest rose in steady rhythm until her breathing matched it. Rachel leaned her forehead to the cool glass. "Please, God, don't let this break her." Behind her, Arrow thumped his tail once, slow and sure, as though he too had sworn the vow. And in that dim-lit base apartment, with danger pressing at the fences, a child finally slept, not because fear was gone, but because love stood watch. The afternoon was unusually still at Camp Clearwater, the kind of stillness that made even the cicadas fall silent. Sunlight striped the small apartment walls in gold and shadow. Rachel had gone to a debrief with Lieutenant Delgado, leaving Lila under Arrow's watch. She sat cross-legged on the floor with a library book, tracing wolves across snowy pages. "They look like you, Arrow. Strong. Never alone." The shepherd lay by the door, head on his paws, eyes sharp. Every sound beyond the walls, the hum of a jeep, boots on gravel, a distant bark, kept his ears twitching. His tail lay flat, sentinel stillness in place of rest. Then the battered phone on the counter buzzed. Lila jumped, her book falling shut. The screen lit with a name. Miss Hilda. Her chest lifted. The kind shopkeeper from Silver Creek, sweaters too big, lemon drops hidden in her pocket, bread saved when cupboards were bare. Lila pressed the phone to her ear. "Hello?" "Emily, dear. Thank goodness you picked up." The voice was ragged, breathless. "It's Lila," she whispered, but the woman hurried on. "I fell, child, behind the shop. My leg. I think it's broken. I tried calling an ambulance, but the line cut. You were the only one I reached." A cough rattled the line. "Please, sweetheart. Come quick." Lila's heart thumped. She saw Miss Hilda lying helpless in the dusty alley, her kind smile fading. Guilt pressed her chest. "Mama's not here," she whispered, "but I'll come. Don't worry. Don't tell your mama," the voice urged. "She's been through enough. Just you. Hurry." The line went dead. Lila froze, breath shallow. Miss Hilda needed her. Now, behind her, Aero barked sharply. He leapt to his feet, body rigid, eyes locked on her. He barked again, fierce, blocking the door with his frame. "It's Miss Hilda," she cried. "She's hurt." The dog growled low, hackles rising, tail stiff. Not fear, certainty. He planted himself like a wall. "Please," she whispered. "She needs me." Aero barked so loud she flinched. He knew. But 7-year-old hearts bend to loyalty, not suspicion. Miss Hilda had been kind when no one else was. Lila's throat tightened. "We'll just look," she whispered, echoing the same words she'd once said before stepping into that alley. Aero resisted, eyes burning with plea. But Lila slipped past him. She yanked open the door and darted into the afternoon glare. The slam cut off Aero's furious barks into muffled thunder. He hurled himself against the door, snarling, teeth gnashing at the handle, windows rattling under his fury. Soldiers turned at the noise, already rushing, but Lila's small figure had vanished around the base's wall. Beyond the gate, a white van idled, its windows dark. Its engine hummed like a predator. Lila slowed, squinting for Miss Hilda. Nothing, just heat shimmering on the pavement. "Miss Hilda?" The van doors exploded open. 2 men sprang out, one broad with greasy hair, the other twitching under a baseball cap. The large man's arm hooked her waist, hoisting her like a doll. "Got her!" Lila thrashed, fists pounding, voice raw with terror. "Let me go!" Inside the fence, Aero's roar turned primal, shaking glass in its frame. Soldiers sprinted, but the van already screeched forward. Tires screamed, dust rose. The thin man yanked a zip tie tight around her wrists. Plastic bit into her skin as she twisted, gasping. The side door yawned open, and she was shoved inside, knees slamming metal. Gasoline and mildew swallowed her. The door slammed shut, sealing her cries in darkness. Aero's howl split the sky, wolf-like grief and rage twined. Soldiers reached the fence as the van fishtailed away. Radios crackled, lockdown, pursuit. Jeeps roared to life, but seconds had already slipped away. In the van, Lila trembled, breath ragged. Her bound fingers brushed her hoodie pocket. Inside, the small silver tag with Aero engraved. She worked it loose. At the next swerve, the tag slipped through the floor's crack, tumbling onto the road. Her only sign. Back at the fence, Aero clawed furiously, eyes tracking the van's dust. His howl rose again, a vow more than a cry. The van stopped at a derelict warehouse, its walls rust-streaked, windows boarded. The broad man dragged her out, rope cutting her wrists. Weeds pushed through cracked concrete, the place reeking of mildew and oil. They shoved her into a chair at the center of the hollow space. Rope wound tight around her chest, her arms scratched raw. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. Then footsteps echoed, slow, measured, heavy. Victor Kane emerged from the shadows. His frame filled the space, shoulders broad beneath a dark jacket. A scar cut across his cheek, his cold eyes glinting with ownership. "Well," he drawled, voice a low growl, "if it isn't the little ghost of Silver Creek." Lila's throat tightened. She forced her chin higher. "You've got nerve. Walking into alleys not yours, shining lights where darkness belonged. Do you know what happens to children who can't keep their noses out of men's business?" He leaned close, his breath hot. "They disappear." A shiver raced down her spine, but she held his gaze. Kane chuckled. "Nothing to say now. You had a loud mouth that night, screaming for help. Do you think anyone will hear you out here? Do you think your little bark dog can claw his way through steel?" At Arrow's mention, her chest squeezed. She saw him, pacing, hurling himself at the door, his growl echoing like a promise. Her lips trembled but held. "Arrow will find me," the twitchy man muttered. "Boss, maybe." "Shut up." Kane's glare cut him silent. He crouched, eyes level with hers. "That mud isn't here, and when he comes, he'll find ashes." She bit her lip until she tasted blood, but refused to look away. For a flicker, Kane seemed almost surprised at her defiance. He straightened, scowling. "Tie her tighter. Let's see how brave she feels in a few hours." As rough hands tightened the ropes, Lila closed her eyes. In the dark behind her lids, she pictured Arrow, his steady gaze, the warmth of his fur. She whispered, barely audible, "Arrow will find me." And though fear pressed every inch of her small frame, the words gave her enough courage to breathe. The moment Rachel burst back into the housing unit and found Lila gone, the apartment exploded with noise. Soldiers barked into radios, boots thundered, and Delgado's clipped voice cut through the chaos. But Arrow was already moving. The shepherd circled the empty bed, whining low, then pressed his nose to the window frame. His body snapped toward the door with a furious bark. "Arrow, wait!" an MP shouted, reaching for the leash. But Arrow would not wait. He slammed into the door, claws tearing grooves in the wood. The lock cracked open, and he exploded through, a blur of muscle and rage. Rachel staggered after him, shouting over the clamor. "Don't stop him! He's all we've got!" Delgado's hand rose, halting the MPs. His gaze tracked the shepherd tearing across the courtyard. "Let him run," he ordered. "He knows where she is." Engines roared to life. Jeeps skidded, headlights flared, and men leapt aboard. Daniel Cross hauled himself into the passenger seat of one vehicle, shoulder bandaged, jaw clenched. He gripped his rifle with his good arm, voice flat. "We follow the dog. Don't lose him." Arrow reached the gates before the guards had swung them fully open. He launched at the chain link, claws catching wire, twisting mid-air before landing hard on the other side. His paws hit gravel with a sound sharper than the shouts behind him. For a heartbeat, he froze, nose skimming the dirt. The wind carried hundreds of scents, dust, oil, mesquite, but he found the one he needed, a trace of sweat, fear, and the faint brush of fabric. His girl. A deep growl rose in his chest. He shot forward, bounding across the scrubland. Behind him, the convoy rattled into pursuit, radios crackling. Delgado barked orders. "Unit 2, flank east. Unit 3, stay with the shepherd." Rachel clung to the jeep's door handle, eyes fixed on the dog racing ahead. "Don't let him out of your sight." Daniel's gaze never wavered. That dog's locked on her. I've seen canines track before, but nothing like this. The desert blurred into streaks of rust-red earth and shimmering heat. Arrow leapt thorn bushes, skirted arroyos, every bound sharper than the last. A rusted fence loomed. He launched, arcing against the sun, clearing it in one perfect leap before landing in a spray of dust. His nose dragged the ground, tail snapping upward. He had something. He barked sharply and veered left. Jeep swerved after him, tires bouncing across the uneven terrain. Derelict warehouses rose in the distance, skeletons of industry. Rachel's heart lurched. He's leading us there. And Cain will be waiting, Daniel muttered, jaw tight. Arrow slowed, pawing at the dirt, growling low. Delgado crouched beside him, brushing grit aside. Something silver glinted faintly. Lila's tag, half buried. Arrow. Rachel gasped, hand to her mouth. She dropped it for him. The shepherd barked, vibrating with urgency. He spun toward the warehouses, then back to them, growling as if to demand speed. Delgado snapped upright. Mount up. He's got her trail. The jeeps surged forward, dust whipping into the fading light. Arrow lunged ahead, his paws beating like war drums. Behind him, engines strained, but it was the shepherd's heart, not the convoy's machines that pulled them deeper into the desert. The convoy screeched to a halt when Arrow stopped suddenly in the road. Rachel was out of the jeep before it fully stopped, stumbling toward him. What is it? What's he found? Arrow clawed shallow trenches into the dirt, barking sharp and demanding. Delgado ordered, "Hold position." A young soldier brushed dust aside until the tag gleamed in his hand. Scuffed, bent, but still engraved with one word. Arrow. Rachel nearly buckled. She left it for him. She knows he's coming. Daniel limped forward, his face pale under bruises. He turned the tag in his palm, voice rough. Smart kid. She believes the dog will find her. Delgado gestured at faint tire tracks etched into the sand. She's alive. They passed here not long ago. We stay on them. But Arrow didn't wait. He nudged the tag from Daniel's hand, dropped it at Rachel's feet, then charged forward again, nose skimming the ground. "Follow him," Delgado shouted. Engines roared back to life. Rachel picked up the tag, pressing it to her chest. "Hold on, baby," she whispered. Night fell hard over the desert, indigo swallowing the horizon. Headlights carved harsh beams into the dark. Arrow ran at the tip of it all, a streak of sable and shadow, his bark echoing across the emptiness. "He's burning himself out," a soldier muttered. "No," Delgado said grimly. "He's burning a trail. That dog isn't guessing. He knows." Daniel's jaw tightened, his voice steady despite pain. "Keep the wheels moving. We don't stop until that girl is back." Rachel clutched the tag so tight its edges cut into her palm. Each bark was both promise and plea. "Find her, boy." "Please." The desert loomed with menace. An old billboard stripped bare. A rusted water tower casting a crooked shadow. Warehouses rising like jagged teeth. Arrow's bark sharpened, urgent. He veered hard toward the cluster of buildings, his howl piercing the night. Delgado's hand snapped to the radio. "All units hold formation. We're close." Engines roared louder, headlights bouncing. Soldiers clutched weapons tighter, adrenaline singing. Daniel chambered a round, the sound final, certain. If Cain thinks we'll turn back, he doesn't know what it means to fight for family. Rachel's tears streaked her cheeks. She whispered to the tag, "Then don't let her be the first." Arrow darted over rusted fencing, nose dragging along the ground until his bark split the night. He veered left, toward a dirt road cutting into the industrial yard. The convoy followed, beams flaring across corrugated walls and sagging cranes. Each flicker of light revealed menace in graffiti and broken glass. Somewhere in that maze of iron, Kane waited. Aero's growl deepened, his body low and sure. Delgado's voice came sharp. Eyes open. This is it. Through the crackle of radios, a soldier reported. Flanking east. No movement yet. Daniel's rifle snapped ready. His voice was steady, his vow clear. We don't leave kids behind. The words threaded through every vehicle, binding them all together. Soldiers, machines, and one relentless shepherd. Rachel pressed the tag to her lips, whispering, "Then don't let her be the first." Aero's howl rose again, echoing off the steel skeletons, raw with urgency. The convoy pressed into the shadows, engines growling low, headlights slicing the dark. And ahead of them all, the shepherd ran, unyielding, unstoppable, tethered by the invisible thread of a girl who had once whispered in his fur, "You'll find me." The warehouse swallowed the night whole. Shafts of moonlight cut through broken roof panels, painting pale stripes across dust and mildew. Somewhere in the shadows, water dripped with a slow, echoing rhythm. Lila sat bound in the center, rope biting her wrists, her chest heaving. She fought to keep her chin low, her fear hidden. Victor Kane paced in front of her, boots hammering against the floor, a knife twirling lazily in his hand. His scar twitched with each grin. "You've got guts, kid. Most people don't last long enough to scream, but you keep getting in my way." He crouched, blade inches from her face. "Do you think that mutt of yours is coming? Dogs die quicker than people." Her heart pounded, but she whispered anyway, "He'll find me." Kane chuckled darkly. "Hope. That's the first thing I cut down." He stabbed the knife into a crate beside her, the crack echoing like a gunshot. While his back was turned, Lila worked furiously with Aero's bent tag hidden in her hoodie pocket, sawing rope fiber by fiber. Sweat slicked her fingers, but she pressed harder, picturing Aero's eyes, his growl at the door, his refusal to give up. Kane leaned against a post, voice dripping menace. "You don't even know when to be afraid. That'll be the death of you." Another fiber snapped. Lila bit back a gasp and kept cutting. The warehouse groaned with silence until the doors slammed open. A shadow streaked through the gap, dust swirling. The roar that followed was not a bark, but something primal, fierce, unstoppable. Aero hurled himself at Kane, 90 pounds of fury slamming him to the ground. The knife clattered across the boards. "Get him off!" Kane shouted, thrashing, fabric shredding under Aero's teeth. The twitchy man by the door lunged for the blade, but Kane's body crashed into his legs. His pistol skittered away as Aero's snarl rattled the beams overhead. "Kill that mutt!" Kane roared, blood streaking down his sleeve. The smaller man grabbed for the knife, but Aero spun mid-leap, clamping onto his wrist and dragging him down with a vicious shake. The blade clattered free, screams rising as Aero pinned him to the floor. "Here, boy," Lila cried. Aero released the man and bounded back, planting himself between her and Kane, hackles raised, teeth bared. Kane staggered up, pistol in hand, aiming straight at Lila. One step closer, and she dies. The shepherd stood his ground, growling low, body quivering but unyielding. Behind her back, Lila's fingers worked frantically, rope fibers fraying. For one breathless moment, time froze. Then headlights slashed through the doorway. Engines roared. Delgado's unit stormed inside with floodlights and rifles. Kane whipped his head toward the noise. That instant was all Arrow needed. He launched, jaws clamping on Kane's arm as the pistol fired. The shot ricocheted against steel, sparks flying. Kane screamed, the gun spinning away as Arrow dragged him down. Boots thundered. "Move! Move!" Soldiers poured in, securing the twitchy driver and sweeping the rooms. Delgado's voice rang steady. "Grab every file. This is the nail in his coffin." Kane shoved Arrow back, lunging for the weapon, but Daniel Cross came out of the floodlights like a storm. His injured body slammed Kane to the ground, pinning him with sheer fury. "You're done, Kane," he snarled, forcing his face into the dirt before snapping cuffs onto his wrists. "Get him out of here," Daniel barked. Soldiers dragged Kane toward the floodlit night, his curses hollow now. Daniel turned to the girl in the chair. Lila was half free, her wrists raw, but her eyes alive. Arrow pressed against her legs, snarling low, a wall of fur and muscle. Daniel dropped to one knee, tearing the last knots loose. The rope fell away. "It's okay," he said hoarsely. "You're safe." Tears blurred her vision. "I knew you'd come." Daniel shook his head, swallowing hard. He came. Arrow pushed forward, muzzle against her chest. She sobbed, arms wrapping tight around his neck. His tail thumped, heavy with relief. "Lila!" Rachel burst through the soldiers, stumbling across the floor. She dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter into her arms. Lila clung to her, sobbing, as Rachel rocked her fiercely. "I've got you. I'll never let go." Arrow pressed close against them, his growl softening into a protective hum. Rachel framed her daughter's face, searching every feature as if to prove she was whole. "You're okay." Through tears, Lila whispered, "Arrow found me. I told him he would, and he did." Rachel pressed her forehead to hers, sobbing with relief. "Of course he did. He always will." Delgado gave one long look, then told his men quietly, "Secure the evidence. Double the perimeter. Let them have this moment." The drip of water echoed faintly in the rafters, not as a countdown anymore, but as the rhythm of life returning. And in the center of the warehouse, mother, daughter, and shepherd clung together, as if the rest of the world could wait. Morning crept into St. Elmo's Regional Hospital in hushed tones. The desert sun painting pale strips across sterile walls. Machines hummed softly, beeping in steady rhythm. The scent of antiseptic lingered, cut faintly by lavender spray. Lila lay curled on a hospital bed, dwarfed by the white sheets. Bruises marked her arms and legs. A bandage wrapped her raw wrist. But her chest rose steadily, alive, safe. At her bedside, Arrow sat pressed close, his coat dusty, faintly stained with other men's blood. His amber eyes never left her sleeping face. Each sound, the squeak of a cart, a cough down the hall, ticked through his ears. He did not rest. Rachel slumped in the chair, her hand over her daughter's, asleep from exhaustion. Across the hall, Daniel Cross stirred, his shoulder bandaged thick. His voice cracked when he asked the nurse, "The girl?" "She's alive," the nurse said gently. "She hasn't let go of that dog once." Daniel exhaled, some weight lifting. "Good," he murmured. Later, Lila stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion fading when she saw Arrow. Tears slipped before she realized it. "You found me," she whispered. Arrow pressed his muzzle into her palm, tail thumping softly. Rachel jolted awake. "Lila?" "Mom," she croaked, voice raw but warm. "We made it." Rachel kissed her forehead, tears spilling. "Yes, baby. We made it." But Lila's gaze returned to the shepherd. Her fingers stroked his fur. "He never gave up." Rachel swallowed hard. "You're right. He saved you. He saved all of us." That afternoon, Daniel asked to see her. Propped against pillows, uniform replaced by hospital scrubs, he still looked every inch the Marine. When Lila entered holding Arrow's collar, he smiled faintly. "There she is, our hero." "I'm not a hero," she whispered. "I was scared the whole time." Daniel chuckled softly, though it hurt him. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's moving through it, and you did. Unsure, she lowered her gaze. Arrow nudged her leg in agreement. Daniel extended his rough hand. Her small fingers clasped his. "You saved us," he said quietly. Her answer trembled, but was certain. "It was Arrow. I told him he'd find me." And he did. Daniel brushed Arrow's fur with his good hand. His eyes softened. "Then maybe you both saved us." The world outside their room quieted into gratitude and fragile peace. Down the hall, MPs escorted shackled prisoners past Daniel's wheelchair. Smugglers, drivers, thugs, until Daniel froze. Clint Rowe. His breath caught. Once a brother in arms, Clint now walked in chains, head high, smirk curling his mouth. His pale eyes met Daniel's without shame. "Still alive, Sarge?" "Guess miracles happen." Daniel's jaw clenched. Memories slammed back. Kandahar heat, sandstorms, covering for Clint's shortcuts, because brothers don't betray brothers. Now here he was, walking under Kane's banner. "You betrayed us," Daniel growled. Clint shrugged. "I adapted. Kane paid better than Uncle Sam ever did. Oaths don't feed you. Power does." Rachel stiffened nearby, clutching Lila tighter. Arrow's growl rumbled low. Daniel's voice sharpened. "We bled together. Men trusted you, and you sold it. For scraps." Clint's smirk flickered, then returned. "Loyalty's a word. Power's real." Delgado's voice cut cold from the rear. "And power's left you in chains. You'll rot for what you've done." Clint's pale gaze lingered on Daniel. "The system's as corrupt as me. You'll see." Daniel's reply was quiet, but hammered home. "No, the system didn't betray us. You did." The MPs dragged Clint away. His footsteps faded into sterile silence. Rachel touched Daniel's hand. "He may have betrayed you," she whispered. "But you kept your promise. You brought her back." Lila stroked Arrow's fur, her small voice firm. "Some people leave. But Arrow, he never did." Arrow's tail thumped once, sealing the truth. Daniel let himself breathe. That night, desert wind whispered through the base. Rachel and Lila sat wrapped in a blanket on their balcony. Arrow lay at their feet, head against cool concrete, ears flicking at every rustle. For the first time in days, the silence felt safe. Lila held Arrow's bent tag in her hands, tracing the engraved letters over and over. Its jagged edge bore the mark of her desperate sawing in the warehouse. Rachel brushed hair from her daughter's face. "What are you thinking, sweetheart?" Lila's voice trembled, but held steady. "I was so scared, but I kept thinking about Arrow. I knew he'd come. She looked down at the tag. I don't want to be afraid anymore. Not of alleys. Not of men like Cain. Not of being left behind. She pressed the tag to her heart. I'm never going to be afraid again. Rachel pulled her close, tears slipping silently, pride mixing with sorrow. You're braver than you know, but you don't carry it alone. You have me. You have Aero. And now... She glanced toward the barracks where Daniel and the Marines rested. You have a family bigger than either of us imagined. Aero shifted closer, his warmth pressing against them both. Above, the stars shimmered, as though waiting for this moment of peace. Lila whispered into the night. We're safe now. Right, Aero? The shepherd nudged her knee with his nose, tail sweeping slow and steady. Rachel smiled through tears. Yes, sweetheart. We're safe now. And though scars would remain, fear would no longer define them. Under the stars, with Aero's tag pressed to her heart and her mother's arms around her, Lila made her vow. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. Spring softened the desert by the time Silver Creek gathered for the ceremony. Warm breezes carried the scent of mesquite blossoms through town, stirring banners above a new red brick building where a shipping yard once stood. Painted murals of children and dogs stretched across its walls. Above the entrance, bold navy letters gleamed in the sun. The Lila Aero Hope Center. Rows of white chairs filled the courtyard. By mid-morning, every seat was taken. Neighbors, veterans, shopkeepers, even the mayor himself. They weren't just here for a ribbon cutting. They were here to honor a story that had already changed them. Near the stage, Aero sat proudly at Lila's side. His sable coat gleamed, a blue bandana tied neatly at his neck, and on his chest shone an honorary K9 badge. His amber eyes swept the crowd, watchful as ever. At 12, Lila stood behind him, clutching a few note cards. Her dress was simple yellow cotton, but her composure lent her a quiet radiance. Rachel rested a hand on her shoulder, pride softening the years of fatigue on her face. In the front row sat Daniel Cross and the Marines she had once saved. Medals glinting faintly, eyes fixed on the little girl who had altered their lives. Mayor Granger spoke first, his voice steady and weathered. Silver Creek has seen its share of hardship, but sometimes miracles grow from hardship. Today, we open not only a new facility, but a promise that light can pierce even the darkest corners. Applause rippled through the crowd. Aero barked once, drawing laughter. The mayor gestured toward Lila. Now, the bravest young lady I've ever met. Rachel squeezed her daughter's hand. Aero pressed close as Lila stepped to the podium. She lifted her head, scanning the sea of faces, and drew strength from them. I don't really like speaking in front of people, she began, her voice soft but clear. The crowd chuckled gently. But I need to tell you something. That night in the alley, I wasn't brave. I was scared. Really scared. But Aero never left. He didn't run, even when I wanted to. She lifted the bent tag she still wore on a chain, its edge scarred from the night she had cut herself free. I'm not a hero, she said, her voice firm now. Aero is. For a heartbeat, the courtyard was silent, the truth in her words hanging heavy. Then the applause came, loud, rising to its feet. Aero barked again, tail thumping against the stage. Lila smiled through tears and hugged his neck before returning to the mic. This place is for kids like me, who need someone to believe in them. And for dogs like Arrow, who just need a chance. Even when you feel small, even when you're afraid, you can still do something good. You just can't give up. Rachel wiped her tears as Daniel and the Marine stood to salute. It was more than a ceremony. It was respect. Moments later, the ribbon was cut, and the crowd surged inside. The air within the center smelled of new paint and polished wood. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, filling wide hallways with warmth. The old shipping yard was gone. In its place was a home. Murals of mesas and leaping dogs covered the classroom walls. Shelves brimmed with books and art supplies. Beanbags spilled across a colorful reading nook. Children darted between shelves, flipping through picture books, their laughter ringing through the halls. Rachel stood in the doorway, one hand over her chest, watching her daughter slip among the children with Arrow padding faithfully behind. For the first time in years, her smile came free of worry. This is what safety looks like, she thought. This is what hope feels like. Outside, the tour reached the rescue yard. Fresh kennels lined the fence, soft bedding and water bowls ready. In the grass, half a dozen rescues bounded loose. Retrievers chasing balls, terriers rolling for belly rubs, a shy hound coaxed out with a cookie. Lila knelt beside a timid beagle, whispering softly, patient, as always. Within minutes, its tail wagged, slow, then certain. Arrow hovered nearby, issuing a short, approving huff, when the dog finally licked her hand. The children laughed, applauding his solemn authority. Rachel's throat tightened. She remembered her daughter's same whisper years ago to a starving shepherd behind a diner. Patience, kindness, loyalty. It was all still there. Your girl has a gift, Daniel murmured beside her, leaning lightly on a cane. Rachel nodded, pride and tears swelling together. Mom, did you see? Lila called, beaming. He trusts me now. Rachel laughed through her tears. I saw, baby. I saw. As the sun set over Silver Creek, the courtyard of the Hope Center glowed with lanterns. Children still played in the yard, dogs loping joyfully through the grass. Neighbors lingered, voices warm with something rare in town, belief. For the community, it was the opening of a building. For Lila and Arrow, it was proof that their bond had reshaped more than one night's terror. It had created a place where children and dogs alike could find safety, trust, and second chances. The story of a girl and her shepherd had become something larger than both of them, a legacy etched into brick and steel, carried on in wagging tails and children's laughter. And though ceremonies would fade and the applause would quiet, Silver Creek would not forget. Under the desert stars, it would remember. A child's vow of humility and a dog's badge of honor, shining together in the sun. Around them, the community seemed to breathe differently. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down on dusty streets now leaned on fences together, laughing, pointing out the dog's antics. Veterans who carried their own scars smiled as children tugged them into games of fetch. The mayor stood with his hands folded behind his back, blinking against the brightness in his eyes. The center was more than just a building. It was a promise that the darkest nights could be transformed, that what had been broken could be rebuilt into something stronger, kinder, lasting. As the sun dipped lower, painting the rescue yard in hues of gold, Rachel looked at her daughter, kneeling in the grass, Arrow beside her, children's laughter ringing like music. she felt something she had not dared feel in years. Peace. And in that moment she knew Silver Creek wasn't just surviving anymore. It was healing. The desert held its breath at sunset. Out beyond Silver Creek, the mesas stood like ancient sentinels, their rugged faces awash in gold. The wind carried the scent of dry sage and warm earth, the air cooling as shadows lengthened across the sand. The cries of children from the rescue yard had faded into the hum of crickets, and the town itself seemed to soften, wrapped in the gentle quiet of dusk. On the steps of the newly christened Lila Aero Hope Center, Lila sat cross-legged with Aero pressed close beside her. She leaned into him as the day's heat slipped away, her hand absently tracing the edge of his badge where it gleamed faintly in the fading light. The shepherd's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, each breath syncing with her own, as though they were tethered by something unseen. Rachel stood a few feet away, speaking quietly with Daniel and Mayor Granger. Their voices were hushed, respectful of the child-dog pair silhouetted against the desert horizon. Even the adults knew the moment belonged to them. Lila tilted her face to the sky, watching the first stars prick through the violet canvas overhead. Her lips parted, carrying words that felt less like speech and more like a vow. "We're just getting started," she whispered. Aero's ears twitched. He turned his great head, amber eyes locking on her with a depth only she seemed to understand. His tail thumped once against the step, slow but firm, like the punctuation to a promise. The sound made her giggle softly, the kind of laugh that had been absent from her life for too long. She pressed her forehead to his, closing her eyes. "You hear me? We've got so much more to do. For the kids, for the dogs, for everyone who thinks they're too small to matter." Aero whuffed quietly in reply, his breath warm against her cheek. Behind them, Rachel watched with tears glistening in her eyes. Pride swelled in her chest. Pride not just for the daughter she had raised through hardship, but for the dog who had walked into their lives battered and scarred, and chosen loyalty over fear. Together, they had built something far larger than themselves. Daniel's voice, low and gravelly, carried across the evening air. "You know," he said, glancing at Rachel, "I've seen men talk about miracles on battlefields. Most of the time, they meant surviving when they shouldn't have. But tonight," he trailed off, his eyes fixed on Lila and Aero. "Tonight, I think I finally understand what one looks like." Rachel swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Me too." The last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, and the desert was bathed in twilight. The stars grew bolder, scattered across the heavens like lanterns, guiding the weary home. Lila leaned back, resting against Aero's solid body, her small hand still clutching his tag. "Mom says angels have wings," she murmured into the night. "But I think maybe sometimes they have paws instead." Aero shifted, resting his heavy head on her lap. His tail thumped again, steady, resolute. Above them the stars blazed brighter, as if answering, and in that moment, child, mother, soldier, and shepherd, the town of Silver Creek found its quiet miracle, not one born of wings or thunder, but of paw prints, and the unshakable love they left behind. Sometimes the truest miracles in life don't come wrapped in lightning or grandeur. They arrive quietly, in the steady gaze of a loyal dog, or in the soft weight of a paw resting against your hand. Stories like Lila and Aero remind us that love for animals isn't just affection. It's partnership, healing, and the kind of loyalty that never wavers, even when the world does. If you've ever looked into the eyes of a German shepherd, or any dog, and felt that unspoken bond, you know how deep it runs. Our animals carry us through storms, teach us courage in silence, and remind us every single day what unconditional love really means. If you'd like to explore a resource that might help you strengthen that bond with your own dog, I can share one I personally found meaningful. It's not about buying or selling. It's just something that may help you connect on a deeper level, if you feel called to. Take it as a gentle nudge from a friend. Give it a look when you're ready. And in the meantime, hold your dog close tonight. They're already the greatest gift you'll ever have.